Hare Krishna. Let us understand the mechanism of addiction. How does a person get addicted? What is addiction? Why some substances in this world or actions cause a person to become addicted? To a greater extent, enslaves his consciousness, and to greater extent, other substances also it makes a person addicted, and how to overcome most important digital addiction. And we'll try to understand the mechanism of addiction which is forming in humans. Now this is directly related to our spiritual practices also. Any practices we do, it is designed to make a person free from slavery, to take him beyond the influence of all kinds of addictions, to make a person more free. Like material life consistently, it is actually dependency, bondage to matter, bondage to some so-called virtual happiness of being in this world. So when we feel like where we feel like Almighty God are receiving the corresponding results. Now we'll try to understand what is dependency. Dependency, according to the definition of Wikipedia, is a need to perform some action despite the negative consequences, the adverse consequences that come as a result of these actions. Psychological in nature, a person, he becomes tired, agitated, angry because of the dependency, and there is social consequences, problems in relationship, there is medical consequences, like a person, despite the harm to the health, he performs that activities. And then there are spiritual consequences, spiritual by nature, like long run he will not understand that it is going to affect him, that a person does not realize that it is harmful for him in a distant perspective. It prevents him in developing spiritually also. So where do dependencies come from? All addictions come from one system that is actually given to us by God, and which in itself is designed for addiction, but rather actually it helps us to live in this world. This is so-called reward or reinforcement system, right, that exists in the brain of all living entities, starting from flea slugs. They actually received a Nobel Prize for studying this, showing that those flea slugs, they have this this system of reward and reinforcement, because with this we learn, we remember some actions that are positive for them, and then there is an internal reinforcement system, avoiding actions that are negative and learning the actions which are positive based on positive and negative reinforcement. It works on the principle of carrot and stick. So these are the original pedagogical techniques, they call, which operates in all kinds of living entities. Like it has binary nature, 0 1 0 1 0 1. Even the computers are also built in this binary system, 0 1 0 1. It stimulates or reproduces this system very well. That's why it is very easy to get addicted to computers, however paradoxical it may seem. But this system has been used by people from centuries, when they rode horses, when they are training elephants, or when they are training dogs. Even for all of us, as when we are children, we are encouraged by praising when we did something good, scolding when we did something bad. From a scientific point of view, neuropsychological point of view, or social psychology, they began to study it, and in their discipline, which they called it as behaviorism, based on our behavior, they call it as behaviorism. Now this study begins that it governs our behavior. Now they got Ivan Pahlavi, he is a Nobel Prize laureate. He is the first person, he scientifically studied these mechanisms of dependency, rewards, conditional reflexes, and the most impressive result in this area was achieved by a man named Skinner, and he developed a philosophy based on this study. He says that a person is like a robot, and he should be programmed. That's all. It is possible and necessary to train him, and train him in some perfect way, encouraging him for doing something well and punishing him from doing something wrong. In that way you train a person. Now at some time, in their attempt to reduce the whole human nature precisely to primitive reactions, according to the principle of raga and dvesha, I want, I don't want, I like, I don't like, I love, I don't love. So this is actually what they thought is human being. But the problem of this system is they don't understand that there is some freedom of the soul also. But they try to make it minimize, no? But anyway, we'll try to understand what is this programming. We cannot still reduce to the primitive robot like mechanism and all the reactions what are happening. We still have some freedom, but there is programming that happens. So in this discussion, we'll see what is the programming and understand how various substances or actions, and in particular gadgets, smartphones, program us, and how to get out of the influence of this program, get rid of this influence. So the philosophy of Skinner was the basis of the latest development that are used by the owners of social media. Also they use in the network. They see in the account of human psychology and human that reward and punishment system. No, you do it, you get reward, and in this way most of them they are tamed by this social media and all. Now neuropsychologists, they formulated the controlling and behavior systems. It consists of three things. One is trigger, behavior and reward. A trigger is some kind of external stimuli that arises in us. It's called sanskara, the memory of previous actions. It pushes us to certain behavior, actions that either lead to rewarding or some punishments respectively. Like we began to behave in some way, as a result this trigger, there is sanskara, udipan, we can call it in a very sophisticated language, it can be called. This behavior leads to a reward, which in turn strengthens the sanskara or the impressions. That is, in the end, all the behavior or learning, the whole system of learning is based on the fact that we have the mechanism of emotional memory. Like say, if I do some activity, I got an impression of that activity and that stores in my memory, and when next time I am in front of that activity, I want to do it again. Say I ate an ice cream. So now I enjoyed the ice cream, the impression remains. So when next time I see an ice cream, then I get a desire to again enjoy the ice cream, and then I eat again, and again the memory, the emotion comes. So I enjoyed it. So again another impression comes. So again I want to repeat the same action of eating the ice cream. So see the ice cream, get an desire to enjoy it, you get an enjoyment experience, and then you try to do it. So there is a udipan or the trigger, there is an action, then there is a emotion or result to it, and then it is actually the emotional memory. So this whole mechanism works in this way, and we remember everything that caused some pleasant sensation and vice versa. We also remember everything that caused unpleasant sensation. We try to repeat these actions that lead to pleasant sensation and avoid those actions that lead to unpleasant sensations. So neuropsychologist mechanism began to study in more detail in the middle of 20th century, and the revolutionists in this area are two Canadian scientists, Olds and Miller. They called it pleasure center in the brain. So what they did, they implanted some electrodes in a rat, and by mistake, it often happens in science, they came up to a new study. What they did, in one rat, an electrode was implanted in the wrong place, and instead of avoiding the current shocks in this electrode, this rat began to fringely desire shocks in that area in the brain, and she ran to that part of the cage where the electrode shocks her brain, and she began to run again. When the experiment slightly modified, the rat was given a lever and a paw, and it could press, and it started pressing whole 24 hours days almost 7,000 times until it fell to the floor exhaustion. This rat, from pressing the lever, the so called pleasure center, forgot about eating, sleeping, everything, and again it was pressing, endlessly pressed, until some of them even died. This behavior made for the scientists understand that there is a hope for solution for all problems. What happened is, like, this rat, when it started pressing, so this rat, it was getting some sort of pleasure, and so when the shock was coming into that part of the brain, it was experiencing some pleasure, and it wanted to do it again and again. And then the scientists thought, maybe this is the place where we can get pleasure and all the problems of human life is solved. No, we just have to implant some electrode in the human brain, and whenever you want, you can experience pleasure. They made, actually, then of course now this experiment is banned, but they managed to carry out on several people who behaved exactly same way as the rats. With a frenzy, they pressed this lever or button which gave electric discharge and could not stop. The first temptation that the scientists succumbed to was to interpret that the rat was enjoying itself. They unfortunately began fascinated by this theory. It's like they did not listen to the people who they experience. They said we are not giving any pleasure, we are instead feeling despair, but at the same time they could not stop pressing the lever infinite number of time, also forgot everything about the world. The more detailed experiment was carried out, and interestingly, in particular when the pleasure center in the brain, the so-called pleasure center in the brain was excited, the rats ran after food faster, they ate more, they consumed more, but at the same time received exactly same amount of pleasure from the food they did as usual companions without electrodes in the brain, or even less. But nevertheless they had a very strong stimuli. Actually in this behavior of rats, they actually it is exactly same thing is happening, in the it is performed this experiment at global scale. People are forced to run, eat fast, consume more, but when they carefully studied all these processes already in the second half of 20th century, they understood the main culprit for all this process in the brain, the neurotransmitters. The system in the brain is called dopamine, which you may have already heard about it. So dopamine is a small molecule that operates the entire sophisticated and very finely tuned system in the brain. This is an absolutely amazing fragile mechanism created by the creator in order to either give us opportunity to enjoy in this material world or disappoint us. Either help us learn a good healthy lifestyle, learn avoid some unpleasant things, or vice versa, or imagine ourselves to be God and consider ourselves to be infallible, etc. That is actually double-edged sword. So this dopamine gives you an idea how subtle this mechanism is. We should know that there are 86 billion nerve cells in our brain and only 20,000 neurons produce dopamine. That's all. This is, you can see, absolutely insignificant percentage, but nevertheless this dopamine, which is in my it is actually the mode of passion, the rajoguna in all of us in our brain, it is manifested. 20,000 of these cells that produce dopamine control a huge number of neural networks in our brain and control this entire system of what people call pleasure or material happiness or prayasa, whatever. They control this very dopamine button in our brain. The task of the people who just want to enjoy here in the material world is finding this dopamine button and pushing it again and again and again, like the rats from this experiment, the Olds and Miller experiment. Now we'll try to understand. So what they understood is, like, when you perform some activity, the dopamine excites. When you eat something, it's not the food that is actually giving you pleasure, it's the dopamine that excites. Say if I'm eating ice cream, immediately it flares the dopamine, and that I feel, oh, I enjoyed the ice cream. If I watch a movie, it flares my dopamine, I enjoyed the movie. If I am meeting somebody or doing some activity where I feel that excitement, it's not the item. Say if ice cream gives pleasure, it should always give pleasure. No, after some time you get bored because the dopamine don't flare. So it's not the item, it's that actually dopamine that is the cause of the pleasure. You try to understand. So dopamine is what is considered as happiness for us. If the dopamine excites, we feel, yes, I enjoyed, I am happy. If dopamine does not flare, then no. Now we'll try to understand the functions of this dopamine. The dopamine system, it actually deceives us. That by falling from this dopamine lure, this dopamine hook, we destroy our own lives. Now in order to understand this very clearly, we must know the features or the functions of this dopamine system. First thing is, it is impossible to saturate it. No matter how much a person presses this button, no matter how much dopamine is produced, satisfaction never comes. There will never be a moment when a person says, that's enough, I am absolutely completely happy. No, there will never be such a moment when we follow, we say, oh, stop a moment, you're beautiful. This will never happen. We continue to press again and again and again. This is a feature of kama. This is lust, insatiable desire. Krishna speaks in Bhagavad Gita. He says, Mahashano, Mahapapma. Mahashano means this is an enemy that lives with us in all. It's all devouring. He says that, like, say if I am eating, I ate something, I enjoyed, and again I want something else, I enjoy. I get a car, I enjoyed it. and after that I want another car, I want a house, I want another house. You always trying to flare your dopamine with newer and newer things, greater and greater things, and different things. So it's all dopamine. Now we say, okay, I enjoyed some nice food, I enjoyed some nice friends and all, but again after some time dopamine says I want more. So it never gets satiated, the desires will never end. So the desire is what the dopamine should be flared, it should be excited. No, it's like a fire. Krishna calls, he can never, he can he can devour an infinite number of things and he will never be satisfied. There will never be a situation when we say that's it, absolutely satisfied, no kama will, it only flares. This is actually like, very important feature of dopamine system. So the system is, it's not the items, it's not the things, it's not the people, it's not the places, it's not the movie or anything that is actually giving pleasure. The dopamine in our system is actually the cause of the so-called pleasure which we think. That should be very clear. Anything you do, the dopamine flares. Then dopamine excites, we feel it as a pleasure. It's not the food or not anything. That's the experiment. They understood that when the dopamine is flare, it is not interested in food or sleep or sex or anything. The rats are just interested in this dopamine only, because that is not needed. What is needed is dopamine only. All these things are for dopamine only. Whatever food we are eating, whatever things we are doing, whatever going to different places, just for this dopamine excitement only we are going. So, but this dopamine never gets satisfied, no matter how much you do all these things. No matter how much we give food, how many varieties, how many dress, this, that, all these things is for dopamine, and dopamine is never satisfied. So we keep on doing lifelong, and this dopamine system reacts very violently to unpredictable things. Like when some unexpected joy falls on us, the dopamine system reacts very violently to this. And conversely, when some kind of reward comes regularly and the dopamine system is stable, like the dopamine system stops responding if you know that the reward comes in due course. If you are giving the same food item every day, like say every day ice cream is coming, you don't get any excitement anymore. Once in a week it comes, you are excited. But if comes every day, no more excitement. So dopamine don't react. If something unexpected comes, suddenly somebody comes and says, okay, no, there is a treat for you, I am going to give you a special drink. Then we are excited because it is coming. No, it's a reward, unexpected reward comes, then we are excited. Regularly it is coming, no more excitement. So dopamine, it does not react when everything comes. It is expected, dopamine say no. And dopamine reacts violently to unexpected things. Like say if we suddenly get a 500 rupee note in your old jeans or t-shirt, then immediately we feel very happy, suddenly the dopamine. But it gives more pleasure than the regular salary which we get end of the month, which is much more. Like the salary which we are getting is more than this 500, but you get more happiness getting a 500 rupee note in your old jeans than the salary also, because the dopamine system, it reacts very violently to unexpected things. Dopamine system is very sensitive. It reacts very violently to novelty also. If we are getting new things. And another thing is, if you don't give which is expecting, it will drop below the system, that it punishes. Like say I am expecting every day something, and if I don't get it, then dopamine drops. Like every day I am getting some nice mango juice or something, and suddenly I don't get it, I feel very sad, the dopamine drops. So any new moments or everything that in new excites the dopamine system, and vice versa. The old quickly gets bored. Dopamine system ceases to overreact and release vigorously rewards us when we receive something already programmed. Say if we expect rewards that does not come, then dopamine drops the below level system. Like say for example, you are constantly encouraged, and suddenly you are deprived of encouragement, then we react very violently and very negatively. Like say if a person is giving every day a beggar 100 rupees, and he gave him 100 rubles or 100 rupees, and one fine day he walked past him and he did not give this 100 rubles to the beggar, then this beggar will be terribly indignant, and he begins to shout, what do you think of yourselves? This is actually natural reaction of the dopamine system. When the expected reward, to which a person no longer happy, does not come, then accordingly the dopamine system reacts also violently. This is actually used for making good habits. Say you are waking up every day at 4 o'clock in the morning, and suddenly one day you wake up at 7 o'clock, you feel very sad because dopamine falls. By waking up at 4 o'clock, you initially you are very happy, but after that you don't feel happy. But if you don't wake up, you suddenly wake up at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, then dopamine punishes. So in that way you develop a good habit. So dopamine is not just a negative thing, it's a positive also to develop good habits also. Say every day you are doing your yoga, and every day you are doing your pranayam, every day you are doing some some of your good practices, and if you then dopamine don't do anything, you will not get any separate pleasure. But if you don't do that activity, immediately dopamine punishes. So that is the need of the dopamine, to make us do something nicely. So it is a reward also, and it's a punishment also. If you don't do it, you are get punished. That is the point. So now what happens is, this element of surprise also is there, allows a person to learn. So what happens if dopamine, now you get new things, dopamine becomes excited, so that helps us to learn new things. So say now we are learning about dopamine now, so this will excite our dopamine also because you are getting new things to learn. So this is also the advantage of dopamine, to learn things, to have good habits, and to be regulated. So these are the advantages of dopamine. That is a system that is why created by the Lord. And any unexpected rewards make a person say, but there is something in this, and then it encourages him to look for a pattern in what happened. Like when a person begins to constantly or accustomed himself to self stimulation with the help of rewards, it focuses a person on himself and makes a person egocentric. This kind of behavior affects, distorts or reflects our consciousness. In a certain way, a person this is narcissistic disorder, they call the personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder. In order to, this is actually this is hypersensitive dopamine. A person is oriented simply to material pleasure. Cruelty appears in the person, like serial killers, they all have oversensitive dopamine system. More things like the orientation towards pleasure, it hinders the heart of a person, makes more rigid, stony. The person lives for his own pleasure. When this center is excited in a primitive emotional area of our brain, the so-called pleasure center, then the buddhi, the intelligence of person is turned off. He loses his brakes. Like this intelligence is needed to discriminate what is wrong, what is right, because he is living self-centered. It is breaking his intelligence. He is not understanding. I just cannot just for the pleasure, my own pleasure, I like, I don't like. No, we need to have discrimination. What is right, what is wrong? So when you overutilize this pleasure, when we are so much focused on pleasure, we become self-centered. That's why we tell sacrifice. That's why we tell be selfless. That's why we tell give, don't take. You have to give. All good people, what is good means you have to give, you have to sacrifice. Why? Because this self-centered, if you are focusing, we become egocentric. The dopamine is there, needed little bit, but if you just focus on giving excitement, giving pleasure, and increasing the pleasure, we become self-centered, and then we lose our discriminative power, the ability to know what is right, what is wrong. He becomes less intelligent and less able to control his own behavior, and he is deprived of freedom, because he becomes very, very programmed like a robot, aiming, seeking pleasure only. He cannot predict the long-term consequences of his own actions, which is very important function of this buddhi or intelligence. A person who is obsessed with desire for pleasure is completely binded, cannot foresee any consequences. The main thing is that now I will get what I want, that's all. Now the system of remembering some good and correct algorithms of behavior and to learn in all respects is there in our brain. It is very helpful system because it helps us to survive here in this world. Now the problem begins when a person, because of his developed mind, breaks this dopamine system and begins to exploit these capabilities. Now this is actually another section. Now we will try to understand how this dopamine works. So we saw this dopamine system is created to help us, but And we also will try to understand this is actually cannot be satisfied, but we need to regulate ourselves, and we cannot just focus on it, otherwise we'll become self-centered, egocentric. Now how does this whole dopamine system works? Why dopamine does not make us happy? Because after a closer study the functions of the so-called pleasure centers in the brain, the scientists realize that it is not a pleasure center, it is a pleasure anticipating center. Dopamine does not give a person pleasure, it brings him to a state of joyful excitement, it brings the entire system into a readiness or stressful state, and a person takes this excitement as happiness. Unfortunately, it's a fatal mistake of all conditioned beings. It lies in the fact that this dopamine excitement is in which our whole body and our brain, our mind comes when expected reward, anticipate reward, we confuse with the happiness. This is actually what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. In the 5th chapter, he says, Adyantavantu kaunteya nateshu ramate buddhaha. This says that an intelligent person does not follow this so-called happiness. It's actually reward anticipation center. It's not actually pleasure. Happiness means something permanent, but this is not actually permanent thing. It's only excitement of the brain, that the dopamine that is actually considered as, like say I'm eating ice cream, it excites my dopamine, I feel that I enjoyed it, I know I enjoyed the ice cream, but that is not enjoyment, just you excited the dopamine and you feel that it's happiness, but that actually is not work like that. But happiness means something permanent, you will never lose it, but this is like temporary. Adyanta vantu kaunteya, it is coming and going, it has a beginning and an end. So intelligent person don't go in that direction. He will try for something which is higher, which does not have beginning and end. That is the point what Krishna says. Now here, what we get from dopamine is a beginning and an end. And it comes to an excited state and we feel yes, excitement, and then it goes down. Again we have to excite it, again comes down again. So all the time we are working on exciting our dopamine, this pleasure center only. So it's not actually the so-called happiness which has a beginning and an end. This very momentary illusion, even scientists understand, illusory material happiness based simply on the stimulation of senses. Happiness is completely different emotion, and dopamine does not make you happy. No addictions does not lead a person to happiness. Any addictions. Dopamine puts a person in an excited state, and the person accepts this excited state, the anticipation of happiness, the promise of happiness, the promise of reward for the reward itself. This is the problem. The trouble is that we mistake the promise of reward for the reward itself. When the donkey goes after a carrot and considers himself absolutely happy because he constantly sees that carrot, the whole reward system in our brain works on this principle of arousal of a person. A person perceives or interprets his arousal as happiness or as the goal of life. Hacking the dopamine system. This is actually another thing we have to understand. What we are doing, okay, dopamine is giving some pleasure and we are trying to work with. But there is another thing called hacking. We are trying to the hacking of the dopamine system is trying to get some pleasure, more pleasure than what dopamine gives. It is coming up down. Why don't you keep it always up? Why don't we always flare this dopamine? So underline all these addictions, the malfunctioning of the dopamine is the work. The addictions are malfunctioning of this dopamine, all these addictions. Now this features renewed system in our brain, and what dopamine actually does to us in how dopamine deceives us. Let us try to understand how dopamine system can be hacked. There is really nothing to think about, like people have already come up with everything long time ago. There are 4 wonderful ways to hack this dopamine system. Now when any person does any of these 4 things, any of the 4 actions which we are going to discuss, and what happens is there is nucleus in the part of the brain which flares, which produces all these what you call the pleasure, the flaring of this dopamine happens. The central part of learning, which is also associated with memory, it comes from the brain stem region. Large influx of dopamine storms is caused there. Now the 4 ways to create a dopamine storm or dopamine arousal, that is beyond the price, beyond the reward. Like when you just live normally, we get some kind of dopamine regularly. We eat something, we get dopamine, and no, we eat, we enjoy beautiful things. Just by seeing some beautiful table full of food, we immediately dopamine arises and we start feeling some sort of joy. Now here it is, it normally works, but a person is very cunning, so he has to learn how to increase this pleasure by illegal means. Now he receives an the trouble is, when we then the system reacts normally, the person does not get any overdose. And this is actually this is what we need to understand. Some substances don't make us addicts. Like say if we are taking say some fruits, now it does not create any effect much. The dopamine comes, and after that there is a system which is in all of us, which will stop it from getting much more pleasure from it. Like say I am eating some fruits, after some time the dopamine don't excite, so I don't get any pleasure from the fruits, so I stop eating, and after some time again I eat. But the point is, I cannot get addicted to eating fruits because the system is protective. But there is an attachment. But what happens, there are some substances that causes reward but does not cause beyond the reward. There is an internal mechanism that allows this to be extinguished. And a person eats something and he get bored it very quickly. But there are some things, if we eat, for example take drugs or narcotic substances, it gives fun no end. This is the mechanism, this protective mechanism don't work. Like if we eat strawberries, we cannot overeat. In the end we will become bored, he will be tired and he will stop eating. And there are some substances that we can endlessly take, and that's the problem. That means it will bypass this protective mechanism. And like this, there are 4 different ways to cause this dopamine storm in the brain and get an extra prize, hit a jackpot, and to feel in one sense that I am fully God, because I am able to control everything, I am the God. So normally the reward system that works for us gives us the opportunity, of course, to feel like God. It gives us certain feeling of control, a feeling of luck, happiness, but in general it is like small only. Now here what happens is, if you start hacking, then we feel more, because there is another thing that dopamine, one is like we have one system is with the drugs, another is violence, unpredictability and violence. These are also another thing. So what happens is, when we lie, when we try to pass off something as a truth, then we hit some big jackpot. But at the same time the result is unpredictable. We may not disrupt, we may not on the contrary perceive, but this sharpness makes reward. Like we get such a, say we lied something and somebody received some kind of award due to the fraud. This reward is much more tastier than honestly earn the same reward that you have worked hard and you receive. Like this is with gambling, it is based on this principle. Some random algorithms are turned on for the person, a person wins some unexpected jackpot, and all the slot machines are made in such a way that a person occasionally wins. If he never wins, he will get bored and he may not play. But the person wins, and immediately certain desire turns in him, and he feels yes, one way or another, and now he want to repeat it, and he gets so much excited, the dopamine flares up, and then he want to do it again. But surely what happens in gambling, he will not win for the second, third time. And then what happens, the dopamine punishes, and then something else should work. The buttons, they're trying to cheat, but it does not, to deceive the law of nature and try to get some kind of reward without deserving this. Ultimately at the heart of the dopamine reward that was received as a result of gambling is the desire to cheat and thus feel like God. I am God, I am omnipotent. I do not need anything to receive as reward. I can just snatch that award somehow. So this is one way to hack the dopamine system, and people know that at some point they win and the system flares and they have then they lose and the stress build up, despair builds up, and they all means, and when the reward does not come, then the dopamine system drops below zero and they're ready to blow it, but they want to win now because they have to bring it up. But what happens? They cannot win and they cannot do anything, and they cannot stop playing also because they have lost control of themselves, because they called out the gin out of the bottle. Now the dopamine is expecting now. And another thing is to be cruel, power over others. When a person rapes, when a person feels power over others, when like the prison guards, the concentration camps, and when they kill innocent animals, innocent people, and eat meat, and when we show some kind of cruelty, we feel absolute power over others. The dopamine system reacts very violently and we get these overdose of dopamine, and therefore all these actions drag us very much. Like maniac killers, they say that when they kill somebody, at that moment of murder, they want to repeat it because they got it so much dopamine. They pursue precisely because the brain reacts a certain way in the program to do it. And no the but similar things happen, like when we eat some non-veg, the food which is filled with violence. The same thing happens when a people bully children. But ultimately we need to understand that these are very dangerous actions that enslaves us and makes us dependent on them. Now the dumbest way to hack the dopamine system is endless novelty. When we put ourselves in endless stimulations of imaginary pleasures, we again and again and again, like this pornography industry, how a person gets into this addiction. When he endlessly examines some pictures with frenzy, etc., and since each picture is new, if he looks at just one, he would eventually get tired of it very quickly. But all these dopamine traps are based on the fact that a person endlessly, so to spark, renew these things. The dopamine system reacts sharply to everything new. Any kind of change, it again gives a new dose of dopamine. While if nothing changes, then very quickly dopamine ceases to produce. And as a result of this, there are so many things. I can get an idea that there are nasty ways of hacking the dopamine system, that is become a slave, to get rid of all the freedom and all happiness, and we will be completely slave because we are hacking the system. What happens is, the most stupidest way to hack the system is drugs. All drugs ultimately affect the dopamine system very badly. Different drugs involve some kind of system in the brain, like there are LSD, there are some other steroton systems and adrenals and other systems are there, but dopamine system is always involved. And the most difficult drug to get rid of is this of this dopamine system is cocaine. It is specifically blow up the dopamine system completely. It reacts very violently to this, and people who have been in this situation of addictions, they know that they have so called cocaine marathons, and when they do it again and again, the cocaine itself no longer brings them satisfaction, but they cannot stop also. This is the dopamine, its purest form. When a person excites himself, he does not receive any satisfaction. He depletes himself completely, exhausts his resources, destroys himself, but cannot stop because he has already fallen into this loop. This is feedback loop, or he is violated this mechanism that was given to him by God to just do the right thing, but he chose to use it for a wrong thing. And accordingly, we know that these are the principles that we discussed. They all disturb the functioning of dopamine only. And what happens next? Then very sad thing happens. We get some prize, some overdose of dopamine, and this overdose of dopamine is the pleasure center, is perceived by us as something amazing. Now the dopamine itself is an extremely delicate and sensitive mechanism. Please try to understand, this is an important part. why the addiction happens, because dopamine is a very very sensitive mechanism. When the dopamine react reacts too much, then it hides in the cells in a fear. So this actually what happens, the sensitivity of the system decreases so that it does not burn out. This actually what happens. So dopamine if flares so much, it immediately hides, the sensitivity decreases to protect itself. Now basically what happens, this whole system there is to help us function properly here. If suddenly we give some extra blow, big blow, then any system has a fuse, immediately it fuse blows, it lowers the sensitivity. If the dose that we received go off scale, if a person uses some drugs and the dose goes something higher, and some internal romantic period of flirting and all these dangerous drugs things are there, but person gets damaged or blunt dopamine system and ordinary things no longer please him. So when you have taken the dopamine, you have excited the dopamine overdose, then you got pleasure in it, then normal things don't give any more pleasure. I want to eat some food or fruit juice or some simple items, they no more give any pleasure. You only want that much level of dopamine excitement only. Small things no more. They are taking alcohol, they are taking drugs, they want that only. Whole day they will do it. What about some food items, basic food items? No, no breakfast, no lunch, nothing. We just want to excite the dopamine, that's all. So everything that used to bring some kind of joy, everything that gave him opportunity to live like a human being and rejoice, becomes invalid. Life turns in some kind of burden, because nothing gives that amount, that previous release of dopamine. The system no longer responds to them, they are too low since its sensitivity has decreased, and accordingly only these things, the drugs only or something can please a person, which will lead to the same overdose of dopamine. And in the end, a person begins to find joy only in this thing. This is the problem with addictions. The trouble with addictions is not only that a person performs some actions that have detrimental consequences, but that his entire consciousness focus on only one source of happiness, only one source of pleasure. So he does not do any other thing, he just want that only whole day. He gets into addiction from this source, he begins to use it again and again, receives these doses, and since the whole system has become dull, then accordingly the tolerance is reduces. That is, for him, he, in order to get the same experience of even minimal happiness, he needs more and more and more doses and more shocking things. He cannot stop at the same level. And when a person refuses to do this, or when a person does not even increase the dose, then he begins to experience agony. Because when the dopamine system does not receive this expected stimulation, then it retracts. It punishes by lowering the level of dopamine below the baseline. That is, the person begins to really suffer. This is the so-called withdrawal, which is especially difficult in the case of phobias. Heroin, cocaine, it's very difficult for a person because he is not enjoying. Actually, he want to take it to overcome the pain only now. At one point, it's not that he is enjoying that, he is doing it to overcome the pain. It is actually, with all these substances, he no longer leads any of these substances to receive happiness. At first, they lead to some seldom joy, but only to get rid of unhappiness which in life from endless stress. So they are going to some stress, to overcome that they went to drugs and alcohol, so that we will get free from all this stress. But in what happens, in other words, initial flirting was there, but now exactly opposite happening. A person want to embark on the journey in order to diversify his life and get rid of stress, as a result of which his stress increased only to infinity, almost to infinity, to death, to complete self destruction. And far from all these what we have discussed, there are seemingly so many harmless social networks, gadgets and all, which are also completely destroying. Now the logical result, and just such a complete self destruction and destruction of the human personality, turns off the human mind. All people know that those who follow the path of drug addiction stop at nothing at some stage of their devolution. because their minds have already turned off, their mechanism of the mind have turned off. No, they completely focus on themselves, hard heartedness, etc., self destruction. After hearing this, a person can raise his, no. Now we have another thing. Okay, what about computers, my smartphones, social medias, will they have the same effect? No, a question which, there are some questionnaires that are compiled. So we'll discuss in our next section. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.